I'm Dan Koh and I'm running for Congress. I'm from Andover, Massachusetts. My family comes from two different parts of the world, Lebanon and Korea. Immigrated to Lawrence in 1890, worked in the mills, served in the military, and lived the American dream. And I'm running because I believe deeply in that American dream. And I also believe that the American dream today is under attack by this president. That we need to fight for that American dream story that so many of us in this district have. And I think it needs to be more than that as well, than just standing up to Trump, but it needs to be about what are the things that the Democratic Party stands for that provide a future for all of us. And I think it really stays on two main pillars. One, healthcare, and two, jobs. With regard to healthcare, we have people literally deciding whether to put food on their table or pay for their prescription drugs. We need access to universal, affordable healthcare for every single person in this district, and make sure that things like Medicare are alive and well in this district for every person who has access to it. The second is jobs. The Democratic Party needs to be the party of jobs again, and we need to make sure that everyone has access to a good job that pays well, that provides upward mobility. We need to do this in so many different areas, with regard to the innovation economy, with regard to solving the skills gap, with regard to things like $15 minimum wage and pay equity, and with regard to infrastructure so that everybody can get around swiftly. And lastly, as Chief of Staff to the City of Boston and Mayor Walsh the last 4 years, the focus needs to be on people every day. And that's what I learned in city government, that things can't wait till the next legislative session, that we need to focus on the things that are happening for people every day. That means that you can call me on my cell phone. That means when there are potholes that we provide the funding to fix it. And that means those things that are affecting you every day, and I know it changes every day, get the same attention as all the other things that happen in DC. So I ask for you to join me, join our campaign, and I will make sure that the things that you are focused on every day are prioritized, and that American dream story that you know and I know is alive for generations to come. Let's go.
Welcome to the Sun.
Thank you.
Dan Koh, a candidate for 3rd Congressional District. You're, I think, the 5th editorial board that we've had here. Thanks for coming in.
Glad to be here.
We'll give you a couple minutes to talk,
Sure.
to introduce yourself, then we'll all have some questions.
Fantastic.
And we'll assume that everything is on the record.
Of course.
Unless, of course, you ask to go off the record, we can always do that for a couple minutes. So the floor is yours. Thanks for coming to the Sun.
Great, thank you so much for being here. I really, really appreciate it, and I appreciate you guys having me. I'm Dan Koh. I'm from Andover, Massachusetts. My family are Korean and Lebanese immigrants who came to Lawrence, Massachusetts in 1890. From Lebanon, worked in the mill, worked hard, lived the American dream, became members of the military and integral parts of their community. And that American dream story means a lot to me, and it's personal. I think only in America can there be a Korean Lebanese candidate potentially for Congress of his hometown. And I take that, again, I take that personally, and I really believe that under this president, that American dream story is under attack today. And so I think we need to be standing up to this president, but I think it needs to be much more than standing up to President Trump. I think the Democrats need to present an agenda as to what the Democratic Party stands for and how it will help people writ large. And so I think that agenda stands with two main points. First being healthcare, and the second being jobs. With healthcare, we literally have people in this district who are deciding between paying for their prescription drugs or paying for food on the table, and I think that's wrong. And so we need to look at a universal access to healthcare for people in this district, quality, affordable healthcare. And we need to look at how that's going to be sustainable in the long term. We also need to go beyond that and look at what are the specific health-related issues in our district that we need to be tackling first and foremost. I think the first one starts with the opioid crisis. President Trump talked about emergency funds to help combat the opioid crisis, but dedicated $57,000 to that crisis. I don't think that that's enough. I think we need to take it very seriously and have a multi-pronged approach to combating the opioid crisis. With regard to jobs, and I actually brought this in today, I hope I have enough copies for everybody, but I brought in a jobs plan that I plan to be releasing tomorrow. And we don't have to go through all of it, but I just thought I'd very high level talk about. And I think the top line here is that I think the Democratic Party needs to be the party of jobs again. I think the Democratic Party has gotten away from that, and I think it's really important that we be the party of jobs again. And I think that that jobs plan is around 4 main pillars. The first is employment in the innovation economy. With technology advancing the way it is, we need to have a proactive plan for that. The second is bridging the skills gap and making sure that we're establishing true job pathways. The third is fighting for a living wage for every worker. And then finally, it's an infrastructure plan. And I won't go into the specifics of each, but with regard to the first one, I think we need to be looking at, making sure we're expanding funding for small business innovation. For the second bucket, with regard to the skills gap and job pathways, we need to empowering community colleges like Mount Wachusett, who have been working with private sector organizations to help fund programs that educate workers so that they can fill skills gaps. Third, with fighting for a living wage, pay equity I think is very, very important. A $15 minimum wage I think will be very important for this district. And then finally, infrastructure, making sure that we are supplying the funding for the kinds of things like Tiger grants and other things that make cities and towns in this district really go. And so beyond healthcare and jobs, I think the wraparound of this is just simply getting things done and prioritizing the things that matter. I come from working for Mayor Walsh in Boston, where the focus every day at city government is things that really matter for people, things that matter every single day for people, and that changes every day. Some days it is healthcare, some days it is jobs, but some days it's the pothole they hit outside their house when they're driving to work. And the longer those potholes stay unfilled, the more of a problem it is for people, and that becomes the central focus. So I think we need to be focusing on what federal initiatives and incentives we can provide to help people on the ground every day. And for me, as the Chief of Staff, the urgency was that day, and it was immediate. It was not till the next legislative session, it was that day. And I think that urgency of prioritizing things that happen every day in people's lives is the kind of urgency we miss in DC and that we need in DC. And so I will be bringing that urgency every single day. That ranges from having my cell phone available to anyone who wants it so that it can be a quick response, to making sure that we are doing things like looking at federal matches for Chapter 90 money in Massachusetts so that public works departments throughout this district can have more resources to fill those potholes and fix those streetlights. And so that's a little bit about my background and the priorities, and I look forward to any questions you have.
Thank you. Campy?
I was going to say, you've traveled the district, and how do you relate this plan? I've just scanned it, and you do mention some programs that are already taking place. You mentioned, Chelmsford and Lowell and Wachusett and stuff like that. But in walking the
He ran it.
running the district, talking to mayors and people and stuff like that. I mean, what is the perception out there, and also the reality?
Yeah.
Everybody thinks Massachusetts is doing so well, and yet people struggle to get to work. The roads are terrible. We don't have a good transit system, and people are still working 2 and 3 jobs to survive.
Yeah.
So where do you see this hype?
Yep.
And yet the reality, and how are we going to, how do we cure some of these things?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. So first and foremost, the thing that I've heard a lot from a lot of the elected officials, and then honestly people like at the general store at Harvard, is that they really like Congresswoman Tsongas and are very upset that she's retiring. I think most importantly because she's not dramatic. She likes to get things done for people. That's her priority. June Black, who was a legend, obviously, her focus is delivering constituent services every day to people. And they're really looking to make sure that whoever's the next elected official who assumes the Congresswoman's seat is prioritizing people every day and the things on the ground. As you point out, the mayors and everything from elected officials to people every day in the district are talking about the things that are in front of them every day. Things like making sure that there's infrastructure and good, reliable transportation. Things like making sure that they're not going to have to decide between healthcare bills and putting food on the table. It spans the gambit, but what people want is that when they call their congressperson's office, they get a call back and that their solution gets solved. And it's not, oh, that's a state issue, or oh, that's not our jurisdiction. Everything is my jurisdiction if I'm fortunate enough to get in the sense that every single constituent complaint or inquiry that would come to my office, I'd want to prioritize. And if I can't solve it, I would want to help them find someone who does. And that's what people care most about. They don't care about, extreme ideology. They don't care about how many times they see their elected official on MSNBC or how extreme a tweet they're doing. What they care about is whether the issues that are facing them every day are being prioritized by their elected officials. And that matters for selectmen all the way to federal office.
So you're going to be a street level congressman.
Yes, sir. I want to.
That's what you got from working for Mayor Walsh.
Right.
That's a lot of the job that you had.
Yeah. I want to take the city level mentality of focusing on everyday issues of constituents and take that to DC and have that mindset in everything that I do down there, because I think that urgency and that prioritization is really important, and I think that will instill a level of trust in government, especially at the federal level, that is currently not there.
Yeah, and you're one of the few candidates that have moved to the district to run for the open seat.
Yeah.
One of the first edit boards we had, Lori Trahan, we quoted her as saying that, for me, it's a calling. She's lived in the district her entire life. She was born and raised in Lowell. And for others, it's an opportunity.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, she was referring to you and a few others. How do you respond to that criticism when you're on the campaign trail? Because that's surely what it is. A polite way of putting it.
I'm honored at the fact that my family has been here, and my family realized the American dream in this district and have been here for over a century. I spent most of my life living in Andover. My passion for public service started as a volunteer at the Andover Healthy Communities in the old town hall in Andover, then in the Lawrence Prevention Center in Lawrence, and then when I worked for Ted Kennedy, I was living in Andover. And so I'm really fortunate to have grown up in the Merrimack Valley, to have my family be from the Merrimack Valley, and I feel an incredible loyalty to this area. And so it's a place where I always wanted to raise my family. And just as a side note, in 2014, in the Andover's magazine, which is Andover Townsman magazine, I'm quoted as saying that I wanted to move back here to raise a family. So this isn't a thing that's recent for me. I love Andover. I grew up there. My campaign office is there, and I'm just very proud to be from this district.
Do you plan to stay in Andover after the election?
Sir. Yes, sir. It's always the place where I want to raise. I think Andover and the Merrimack Valley is the best place to raise a family in the world. I really do. I'm biased.
Dan, for the last 2 decades, this district has been a Lowell-based candidate. And there's some people out there who think, well, that candidate has to be from Lowell to represent this district. Obviously, you know, there isn't anybody really from Lowell. There are people who have connections to Lowell. So how do you overcome that? And what do you say to people when you say, hey, you know, I mean, the last candidate who represented Lowell from Andover was Paul Cronin, which is a different district.
Sure.
No, but it is something you have to overcome.
Of course.
And you have to convince people, hey, I'm going to be concerned about not only Lowell, but the district. So are you facing that at all? Do you see that? Or how do you overcome that and respond to people?
That's a good question, and what I've heard a lot is that people want a elected official who cares a lot about the nuts and bolts issues that are happening in Lowell. That's what I hear a lot about Lowell. The thing that people love about Congressman Tsongas and loved about Senator Tsongas was that he prioritized those things as a Lowell Historic National Park. You know, making sure that the appropriate designations were here to spur economic development. I think that's what people really care about. Are you creating an environment where businesses and people alike can thrive? And that's, I think, what especially people in Lowell have been telling me they really care about. And that's where I come from. I come from that area where economic development is key and central to what we're doing. Again, the Democratic Party, I believe, needs to be the party of jobs again, and I think that's what fueled Lowell. And so I think that message is really important, and I've heard that, at least so far, it's been resonant with the people of Lowell, and I will work my heart out every single day for the people of the city.
I want to go back to one thing you said earlier, where
Sure.
you mentioned selectmen.
Yep.
Did you say, or were you inferring that you view a member of Congress no more or no less important in a person's life than a member of the Board of Selectmen? Is that what you were saying?
No more, no less, in the sense that if someone goes to his or her selectman and wants help, it's the responsibility of that select person to help that person and get that problem solved, no matter what it is. And I think if that person instead goes to his or her congressman and says, I need help, that person needs to take that just as seriously. So I think no matter what entrance of government you're in, whether it's city level, whether it's federal level, whether it's state level, that the elected official needs to take that individual constituent concern just as seriously.
And to Candy's point, so you're, I think you're a street level congressman. You want to be as accessible as a selectman.
Absolutely, absolutely, and an activist who wants to get involved in his or her community. I mean, when you go to town meetings or around this district, you see how much people care about their communities, and when there are volunteer organizers in communities about certain initiatives, every single question or every single concern is taken seriously. And I think a lot of federally elected officials have neglected that, and I think that's to their detriment. It's all about the constituent interactions. I think many people over the age of 40, most people over the age of 40 have some kind of note or voicemail saved from Senator Ted Kennedy at some point, right? That was what made him so beloved. I'm sure a lot of his stances made him beloved, but I think what made him even more beloved was that personal touch and making sure that he prioritized the things that were happening in the district. And that's something that I take very seriously, and something, quite frankly, from city government I learned very early on.
Both Congressman Meehan and Congresswoman Saunders, they've been very good at reaching out to the other side.
Right.
Sometimes on major things, but usually they're taking advantage of things that they can get done.
Yep.
Marty did it on campaign finance, you know, working with the Republicans. Nikki has done it with New Balance,
Yep.
you know, and also with Representative Turner from Ohio on Hanscom Air Force Base, protecting the military, sexual assault women,
Sure.
and the thing. So. And they don't necessarily have to buck the party to do it, but it seems like right now you got Seth Moulton out there. You know, they're looking for opportunities where they can make some inroads with the other party. When do you see that opportunity? I mean, you seek out like-minded people to get things, and what examples of that can you say you've done in the past? I know the city council in Boston is nonpartisan, right?
Yep,
but
yep.
there are people from different. So any examples where you've done that you've actually brought people together or tried to?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think to the detriment of voters, DC has become an environment where if you have an R after your name or D after your name, not only excludes an ability to interact from a professional level, but also from a relationship building level. I mean, that's not what our founding fathers designed, right? Our founding fathers designed an environment, and honestly, quite frankly, it's not what my mom taught me growing up. When you disagree with someone, you're supposed to find common ground and figure out how you can move forward. And instead, in DC, it's if you disagree with someone, you should tweet about them and make them, you know, demonize them to your constituency. That's just not how government should operate. And I believe deeply that building relationships with people you disagree with is really, really important. And so, honestly, as chief of staff, there were a few things that came to my desk that weren't controversial and that had opposite sides in the decision to make. And for me, the convening people of different opinions and getting them to talk to each other and understand where the middle ground is was something that was my job every day. An example of something that we were able to do in Boston that I feel has scalability in DC from a bipartisan perspective is the use of data and technology in making people's lives better. So we came up with this program in Boston called City Score, the idea being that every single thing we did, from how quickly we filled our potholes to how many library users we would have every day, should be measured, and we should try to set goals to them. And we should be transparent about where we were doing in terms of whether we're exceeding or behind on our goals. And so it's still actually available on boston.gov/cityscore. You can see where we are every day. We made it a green monster format so that people got a little more excited about it. But it was hard to do so. I mean, there were people who had been working for the city for a long time and didn't necessarily want a new way of measuring themselves. We had people disagreeing on what metrics were being measured and all that. But what we realized was that we owed it to the constituents to be as transparent as possible. And we also had to trust the fact that the constituents, and quite frankly the media, would appreciate the transparency and not just pile on every time we were underperforming. And as a result, we saw significant gains as a result of being transparent about our data and holding people accountable. We were able to cut our fire truck response times. We were able to save money because we were able to optimize better how we were filling potholes. Those kind of things are really, really important, not because of data in a vacuum, but because people are getting served better. And I think that's really, really important to think about, because data itself and the use of technology and data in government is way behind where it needs to be. And there's a very small but very passionate group of people in DC on both sides of the aisle who believe that data and more outcome-based funding of programs needs to happen in DC and needs to be increased. And so as far as going to DC, that area around working on technology to serve people better, and quite frankly, you know, if I'm fortunate to be in DC, I'd really love to serve on the Appropriations Committee, because I think we should be funding programs that work. I don't think that we should just be blindly funding things like we've always done. But we should demand where that money is going and what return we're getting from that money.
Should they bring back earmarks?
I think the problem with earmarks is that it got to a point in which spending was out of control and that there was not a lot of accountability to where they were. But I do think that we should think about how we better fund programs like Tiger Grants and create more resources for those kind of things, so that when there's a process and a responsible process for allocating funds, that there's money to go around. I mean, I think every city and town in this community could benefit from a good Tiger Grant, and
Lowell certainly has.
exactly. And so the reality is there's just not enough money to go around. And so I think if we think about more of those monies that are responsible, that have a good process involved, I think we should think about increasing money for that, and that's part of the plan.
Quick follow-up on
Sure.
a point can't be made, then I'll relinquish the floor.
Sure.
You mentioned Seth Moulton
Mm-hmm.
and how he's created a PAC where he's funding certain congressmen and congressional efforts across the country. Do you consider yourself a Seth Moulton type of Democrat who would like to see a new leader of the Democratic Party in the House of Representatives?
I don't. I first of all, I have a lot of respect for Congressman Moulton, but I respectfully disagree with him on the question about leadership of the party.
Really?
I think Nancy Pelosi is in a very difficult position in the fact that she's been in the role she's in and has to take a lot of barbs, and I think she's done a lot of real good for the party. Everything from the ACA to some of the stances. I mean, yesterday she was on the floor for 8 hours, which is not easy. And so I think that I respectfully disagree with Congressman Moulton. Do I think that there needs to be more young people in leadership, and do I think there needs to be more people of color at the leadership positions? I certainly do. But as far as the work that Speaker Pelosi has done, I believe a lot of it has been exemplary, and I support her.
Interesting. Tom?
Dan, I was thumbing through the economic plan.
Sure.
And I know you said in your overview that helping small business was very important to you.
Yeah.
But I noticed when I dug down, you're advocating a $15 an hour minimum wage.
Yeah.
That is something that's really scared small business to the point they don't think that they can sustain their workforce. I know in places that they've started with the $15 an hour wage, they've seen that, they've seen a bump, in business.
Sure.
But it's sort of leveled off now. So,
Right.
I mean, how do you reconcile those two things?
It's a great question, and I think that we need to think about the ramp-up period for a $15 minimum wage in a way that is favorable towards small businesses, whether that be tax incentives or whether it be a different scale for businesses under a certain amount of employees. I think it's a great point. I mean, I think especially when you look at towns like Ashby and you think about how close they are to New Hampshire, those are the challenges that I'm thinking about, right? And so I think you're absolutely right that we need to have special consideration for small businesses in regard to this, but I think the reality is there are a lot of businesses in Massachusetts who can afford to pay their workers $15 and who aren't, and I think we need to be, at the end of the day, in the team of the workers and not in the team of the business owners.
Okay, just following up, talking about businesses that can afford to pay more.
Yep.
What's your impression of the tax cut?
I think that the tax cut should be repealed for everyone except for the middle class, and I think that the tax cut, even for the middle class, is not an enduring one. If you look at the numbers, actually, depending on how you look at it, from 2024 to 2027, it's actually a tax increase on the middle class. And so I highly disagree with the way that tax cut was rolled out. The process in which it happened, in which literally we were writing notes in the margins as we were leading up to it, I think was not a deliberate process at all. And I have a lot of concerns about the long-term effects of the tax cut to this country. I mean, if you look at Reagan-era tax policy, and you look at the point on the line graph in which productivity and wages started to bifurcate significantly, I believe at least it was due in large part to Reagan-era tax policy, and I worry about, especially with inequality today, whether that will be exacerbated by this.
Can you define middle class?
Look, I think there's it's a difficult question
Because everyone has their own definition
Right.
of what middle class
And
is.
honestly, I think that it's important that we allow people to identify in a class that they want to, because there are people who are, may make more income from their job, but are still have lots of kids and are struggling to provide food on the table, and there may be some people who are making less money who don't have as many constraints in their resources. So I think it's important to allow people to self-identify in that regard.
Chris?
I don't think you got to answer the healthcare question at the forum on Tuesday. We'd love to hear a little bit about your vision for healthcare. You mentioned that as one of the two key pillars of something you need to change. Now, do you support a single-payer system, or do you support tweaks to the existing Affordable Care Act?
Well, so I think that it's not a mutually exclusive proposition, and I say that because I believe we need to get to a single-payer system. I believe that having access to quality, affordable health care universally without a lot of obstacles involved is really, really important. And if you look at the numbers, actually, if you look at, first of all, some of the money that could have gone to healthcare that instead went to the tax cut, but otherwise overhead, negotiating power, premiums, deductibles, etc. If you actually factor that in, you could actually have a relatively revenue neutral payment model for it. So I think that long-term access to quality, affordable healthcare, making sure more people are healthy is really, really important. In the short term, I think it is clear that the ACA is being, almost surgically dissected. The repeal of the individual mandate, we still don't know the implications of that on premiums. I think the president has realized that he can't full-scale repeal the ACA, so what he's trying to do is to try to take away some of the provisions of the ACA that make the ACA work. The individual mandate is there because, and it's actually an idea by the Heritage Foundation originally, is so you can have more healthy people on the system to offset those who are more sick. That being gone, it's unclear how long-term ACA remains viable.
I'd like to just get back to, because you did mention, okay, you support Nancy Pelosi,
Yep.
but you say the agenda has to change for the Democratic Party,
Yep.
and I think that's the root cause of some of these issues, why there's these young mavericks in the Democratic Party in Congress and trying to get their point across. But
Sure.
So the view that I got of this, the President's State of the Union address, I saw, the cameras constantly showed Nancy Pelosi. And then the Republicans clap for anything, But the Democrats are there. Trump talks about, increasing funding for the military. The Republicans clap. Nancy Pelosi just sits there stoically. Now you're in the seat next to Nancy Pelosi. Bedford Air Force Base is down the street, and Trump talks about increasing funding for military, Air Force, everybody else, in the military, proud of the troops. Do you clap? Or do you stay there stoically with Nancy Pelosi? You're sitting next to her. You're sitting next to her.
Well, look, I think what Speaker Pelosi, I don't know for sure, but I think that if you were to talk to her about why she didn't clap, I think that she would tell you that she's a staunch supporter of the military and making sure that veterans have the benefits they need and that the military has the resources they need. I think the frustration here is that a lot of the resources that would make the military thrive, like better VA benefits, for example, or really investing in veterans and making sure that they have both the care and the education and anything they want after they come back from service, hasn't been prioritized by this president. So I think her not clapping was not a sign that she didn't support the military. I think it was a symbol of the fact that this president's priorities are wrong and that he's using the State of the Union as a false opportunity to promote his steadfast loyalty to the military instead of actually doing the things that would really help the military.
But for someone sitting at home, even the uninformed, and they see that, and you talk about building relationships in the founding fathers. I mean, it just doesn't play. It shows it hardens the image that the nation is divided, that the country is divided. And it goes back to the Tip O'Neill era when they used to
Tip and the Gipper.
Well, yeah, they used to, they could be on opposite sides, but still have dinner at night, and then create a great, a great tax plan or something else.
Yeah.
And you wonder if those things are actually taking place anymore, or could they take place?
I think the pendulum has gone so far to the division in this country. I think it started, I think it started a long time ago, but especially when Barack Obama was elected. There was this kind of commitment from the Republican side to pretty much say no to everything. But I agree. I think we need to return to an era of civility in D.C. I think just because you disagree with someone, even if you staunchly disagree with them, there's no reason why you can't have a beer with them. There's no reason why you can't build a relationship with them. And so one of the things that I would want to do very early on is build relationships with people I agreed with and people I didn't, because I think it's important to not just kind of write people off as because they don't have the same ideological views as you as not being good people, right? We in reality, I don't know who my next door neighbor, I don't know the political leanings of my next door neighbor, but if she, in my case she, were feeling sick and needed help, I would help her, right? And I think most people would agree in this room that they would help their neighbors regardless of party. And I just don't understand how all the things that we've been taught growing up about respecting people's differences doesn't apply to DC when finding common ground and actually getting things done for people is the most important thing. And I think that this country is being hurt by this behavior of grown adults that I think is just, when you think about it objectively, it's insane.
Sticking with a couple of issues in DC, if you had been at that table with the president and all the leaders of Congress a couple of months ago when they were talking about a deal for the Dreamers in exchange for the wall, would you have taken that deal?
I wouldn't have.
Could you expand on that, please?
I wouldn't have, and I would have stood with Congresswoman Saunders and Senator Warren on that. And I think the reality is, I think there are certain ideals that at least myself as a progressive and I think the party needs to stand for, and I think it needs to make sure it is a party that is inclusive and that's respectful and quite frankly honors its promises. In the case of DACA, we promised these people that if you were to come out of the shadows and come out, we would create a program and a pathway for you. That promise is being broken right now, and I don't believe that that's something that we should be doing and honoring in terms of how we move forward here. With regard to the wall, I disagree with this wall for two reasons. One, again, from a values perspective, I think we need to be building trust, and we need to be taking walls down as a country and not building them up. Secondly, more practically, if the goal of President Trump is to curb undocumented immigration by building a wall, this isn't the way to do it. All of the studies show that building this physical wall is not going to accomplish the goal of the president. I think it's more about the president's ego and him taking the country as fools, thinking that a wall is going to be the solution for this. It's like, depending on how you look at it, $18 billion plus that could be going to other areas to help curb undocumented immigration, or more importantly, in my opinion, healthcare or a jobs plan for the future that I think could really help people. And I just don't see the wall as not only as what we stand for, but also just getting a goal accomplished that he wants.
Would you agree to a deal to curb legal immigration in exchange for DACA protections? I know there's a pretty big push by Republicans. It seems to scale back legal immigration across the board through various visa programs.
I think in a nebulous way, if you're looking at if there is a comprehensive immigration package that makes sense, certainly, but I don't know the details of those. So I would have to say no now because I don't know what the details of those things are. And I think we need to not just be a country for the elite, but a country for all immigrants who want to come here and work hard and live the American dream. I think we should welcome them. Again, my family, first of all, Lebanon was part of Greater Syria at the time, so if my family tried to come today, they'd be stopped at the border. So they wouldn't even allow it in this country, so it's kind of scary to me that the immigration policy was more progressive in 1890 than it is today. But secondly, they didn't have college degrees. They wouldn't have kind of worked through the filter of one of the proposals that Senator Cotton and the President support. So I would have to see something that was inclusive and actually, in my mind, increased immigration and not decreased it, and especially not set up kind of roadblocks that I think artificially prevent good, well-meaning people who want to participate and live the American dream in this country and preclude.
Sure,
So when do you shut off the border to illegal immigrants? I mean, you just keep your borders wide open? I mean, there are people who really are concerned about security and realize that the first obligation of the federal government should be to U.S. citizens, like veterans who are homeless.
Of course.
And they can't get into public housing, okay, and yet undocumented people can get into public housing. Okay, so I mean, it's a bizarre, out of control system that we have.
Right.
And even if you let in the 800,000 dreamers who have come out of the shadows, why should we keep their parents here who brought them here illegally? I mean, you can't have one and say, well, I want one, but I also want the other. I mean, where's the shut off?
Well, I think there's two parts to your question. And so first, in terms of where do you spend the resources, again, with the President's statement around a wall, the alternative is just using better technology along the border to be able to understand when people are crossing, right? I think that that's a better use of money to really figure out how we best use technology to be able to detect people who are crossing the border, not building a physical wall that can easily be chipped away at or avoided, or in the case of mountains, I think a better use of our energy is spending time on the technology to curb undocumented immigration and not burrowing through a mountain just to build a physical wall. And I think secondly, I think that there is obviously ICE has limited resources, and so if you are an undocumented immigrant and you've committed a felony, I don't think you should stay in the United States, but if you are someone who's come here and you're a member of your community and you've been law-abiding and you have kids here, I just don't think it's a very good use of resources to spend hunting those people down and taking them away from their families and sending them to where they came from. I just don't think that's a particularly good use of resources.
But someone who came in across the border today in Texas illegally, should they be allowed to stay in? They have no history in this country. They've crossed the border, they're detained by ICE. Should they be sent back, or should they say, "Oh, gee, you made it across the border, you can stay in America"?
Well, I think that if you talk to border agents, that they were to find people who are crossing the border illegally, that they are sent back immediately, and I support that.
How do you feel on sanctuary cities?
Well, look, again, I think it goes back to the larger point, which is I think that you think about the resources that are invested in ICE and the resources that are invested in making sure that we're enforcing immigration policies, and I think the essence of why sanctuary cities and that concept exists, and I actually support Rep. Matias's bill on this, is to protect against this kind of search and seizure kind of thing, where we're hunting down people who have been contributing to their communities and have families here. And so I don't believe that we should be spending our resources, in enforcing that kind of practice. Again, if you've committed a felony, certainly. But I think that the vast majority of the people we're talking about have not done that. And I think, again, from a resources perspective, it's just not a good use of resources to be enforcing.
Christian, do you
Yeah,
wanna follow up on
I
that?
just want to go back. It's nice to imagine that there would be an easy bipartisan solution to immigration. But
Yeah.
we've seen that just a bill has not been able to come to the floor with guaranteed support either from President Trump or Speaker McConnell or House Leader Ryan. They have not, Speaker Ryan.
Sure.
They have not committed to bringing a clean up or down bill on immigration to the floor. So, if it came to it, and it looks like it might come to it again, would you support a government shutdown as a way of demanding a yes or no bill on DACA protections, or would you not support that because you don't think a government shutdown is worth that?
I would stand in the way that Congresswoman Tsongas and Senator Warren did and vote not to agree to the plan. I get the concern that I have is the DACA protections are running out. There's this kind of promise that is nebulous, and I just don't think that is necessarily something that we should trust the Republicans with, quite frankly.
So the deal that Schumer agreed to yesterday, you opposed?
Yes.
Okay. Good. So it's more important to shut the government down than to address the other issue? Shouldn't the immigration issue be addressed in a separate piece of legislation?
Ideally, Congress should do their job and find middle ground and actually be able to execute this. But if it meant ending the DACA program to keep the government from shutting down, I wouldn't agree to that. I think that we need to figure out how to create a sustainable path for these dreamers, and the option on the table is just not viable, in my opinion.
Separate from the wall.
Sure.
I think the numbers show that of the 11 million or so people here illegally, 6 million of them are people who came in over the border.
Yeah.
5 million came into the country on a visa.
Yeah.
Okay. Can that be separated out? Should there be two tracks? The wall only deals with half of the problem.
Yeah.
In total. So we have 5 million or so people who are here who we sort of know where they are. They're not hiding.
Yeah.
If this is a problem in protecting our borders, why have both the Republicans and the Democrats been unwilling to go down that path? And I'm not saying send ICE in, but
right.
you can certainly show up at a business and say this person is not drag them up, but you get 90 days.
Yeah.
They're two separate issues. But that's
yes, but I think the principle still remains constant. Whether you came over the border or whether you're overstaying your visa, if we find that there was an example of an individual who was here in this district, who had been here for a long time, who had some kind of stop with a very minor infraction that got caught by a police officer, and now is going through endless court battles and is eventually going to be sent home. He has 3 kids in this district. I think that we need to be better people in the United States, and we need to have a heart. And with someone like that, I just don't think that the idea of taking that individual who has no connection anymore, he's from St. Lucia, any more connection to St. Lucia, sending him back home and going through the whole rigmarole of that, I just don't think that's a particularly good use of government resources. Do I think that we need to ensure that ensure better protocols to make sure that people don't overstay their visas and ensure better technology at the borders so that we're preventing people from crossing the border illegally? I absolutely do. But I think that when we think about it more practically today, if we're going to pursue people who have been in this country for a significant amount of time, have kids here, I just don't think it's a particularly good use of our time to be trying to send them back home.
Is pressuring employers a deterrent?
In what way?
Understanding that if you are hiring, if you have someone on your payroll who shouldn't be here, at this point you pretty much know if someone's here and how long they're supposed to be here. Is there some way to deter employers from hiring people?
Again, I think you just get into this witch hunt situation that I get concerned about, right? Is the government's intervention into the private sector with regard to that. I just get really concerned about it. What's the system? How often are people like sweeping through private organizations, sweeping through the Lowell Sun and trying to catch somebody doing something? Obviously, that kind of environment is not what I think America should stand for.
Dan, when you first announced that, you talked about a grassroots campaign.
Yep.
And you've really moved out front in a big way on fundraising. And much of that fundraising has been accomplished from outside the district. Mm-hmm. Is there a disconnect there between that earlier statement about running a grassroots campaign but then relying on a lot of out-of-district money?
I don't think so. Excuse me. A couple of things on that. One, my focus in the district has been being in every part of the district. Our announcement, our official announcement of the campaign was coupled with the fact that I would be on foot running through all 37 cities and towns, which as of Thanksgiving we did. Mm-hmm. And that was an incredibly meaningful experience for me just because it was with real constituents. It was going to places like the General Store at Harvard and sitting and listening to what people had to say and their concerns, right? And that was my focus, and it continues to be my focus. With regard to the fundraising, I'd say two things. One, first and foremost, I'm proud to have the support of people who believe in me, whether that be my family, whether it be my former colleagues, whether people who have seen my work and think that I'd be a good congressperson, quite frankly. Secondly, and just kind of more in terms of absolute facts, I've raised the second most from the district of anybody in this race. And so I feel proud of that, we'll continue that. And so we feel really strong about where we are in terms of the campaign and where we're positioned. We recently brought on John Walsh as our grassroots advisor. I think very few people would ever question that Governor Patrick's ascension to governor wasn't done through grassroots organizing. And so we feel very excited, not only by John Walsh being on board, but by the team we've built to be able to run that kind of grassroots campaign.
This is my lightning round.
Sure.
Okay? I don't want anybody to be offended.
Let's see.
So we've got some great public higher education colleges and community colleges in this district.
Yep.
And the recurring theme is that gaining access to kids to these colleges, okay, and being able to pay their tuition. They're starting later in life to get involved as consumers, but more and more that the kids have to do other things, stay at home or anything. Any thoughts on tuition? Now Congress has looked into some things. They've looked into the privates on endowments, and they haven't come down yet with the hammer. But more and more people, these things slowly build. About, hey, they should be using more of these endowments to give kids access, pay for their education. Your thoughts on, hey, we want access to health care. What about access to a fair education and making it more affordable for kids?
Well, we have, first and foremost, to answer your question, I think community college should be free nationwide. Jim Vanderhoeven of Mount Wachusett Community College, who I've been lucky enough to sit with and hear his perspectives. What really attracts me to community college is not only is it a great educational path for someone coming out of high school for post-secondary education, but also if you are someone who's lost your job due to some realignment at work and manufacturing or what have you, you can go there and get an education, or you can get a great education from Jim Campanini on wine. So it really depends on what you want to do, but it's an opportunity to not only advance your career as a young person, but also get education as someone who's established in his or her career. I also support early college access from high schools, meaning that making sure that people who are getting educated in their high schools get college credit for a lot of the courses they're doing. Right now, in a lot of our communities in the 3rd District, they're taking AP classes, but it doesn't count necessarily towards college. So I not only support that because I think it's important for high school kids to have early access to college level classes, but also because it sets up a system in which someone says in their senior year, wow, you know, I've already completed X percentage of my first year of college, I might as well go, right? And I think that's important to be able to set up a pathway that's important. And then secondly, kind of coupled with this conversation is around student debt and making sure that we're providing as much as we can towards helping people with their student debt, and especially community college is a place where I think we can do that. And if you look at the data, it gets paid for in the long term because you're getting more people educated, and when you have that, the propensity of someone to be able to feel hopeless or commit crimes drops significantly.
Okay. Now, recently, the U.S. attorney in New England came out against, the pot. He's enforcing the federal ban on marijuana,
Yep.
recreational marijuana sales.
Yep.
So we're at a collision course with Massachusetts.
Yep.
Your general thoughts on that? Should
Yep.
they butt out? Should the
Yes.
feds butt out and the states be allowed to do what they want with this and stuff?
Yeah, I think Attorney Sessions needs to back off. I think it's clear that Massachusetts has spoken on this, and I think he needs to back off. And it's not again, back to resources. It's not a good use of his time to try to, impose some kind of thing on high. That's something that Massachusetts has voted in favor of.
I think I just want to be
Sure.
sure that I've got this position right. I think at Tuesday's forum you said you support revoking the federal ban.
I do. I support a legalization nationally, both because I think it's the right thing to do, but secondly, I think especially in the wake of the opioid crisis, with the resources that we have, needs to be investing in combating the opioid crisis and not on enforcing a recreational marijuana ban that the studies show is not a particularly good use of our time from a resource perspective.
Recently, Amazon and a bunch of other companies are now entering into the study to look at developing their own healthcare plan.
Yeah.
Okay, for the private industry, saying that this just isn't working out there. The costs are exploding, and everything else. Good or bad?
I get nervous about privatization in general, right? So I mean, I think it's. I would have to see what they're proposing, but again, I think we need to advance towards a single payer system. I'm not sure that private creating their own healthcare is the way to go, but I need to see more, quite frankly, before I'd be able to say.
Latest report says if all things stay the same in the federal government, Social Security will be insolvent by 2035. I'll be broke. I'll be living on the street. Okay.
Yeah.
And a lot of companies have gotten rid of even ours. The defined benefit plans, and they're telling kids to get involved in 401ks. But some kids, if they're struggling, they're delaying when they can start saving. What is the answer for Social Security to maintain that sustainability of the program when everything else around it is exploding? Congress keeps using that fund to tap into other things. In your view?
Well, I think that, first of all, I think it's very difficult to sell that we're going to touch any of that. I don't think we should. I think we need to look at longer term how we budget more responsibly for these kind of things, in the sense of a $1 trillion tax cut to the 1% when we could be funding the long term, or at least extending Social Security benefits in the long term. The reality is we have, and this goes back to kind of the promise that we made people. People have been paying into Social Security, people have been paying into Medicare their entire lives. And so the idea that now all of a sudden we would neglect that or break that promise, I think, is against what America stands for.
Okay. Last question for
Sure.
me. Recently, it was a bill it's been done before in the past, but now there's a push on for a physician-assisted end of life.
Yep.
Okay, bill. It's now started in the House. We have a Fitchburg doctor who is promoting it. With certain conditions.
Sure.
They say 6 months within a prognosis of a terminal disease, you have to get all these things. And would you be in favor of a federal law, looking into this and giving people the right to terminate their life if they have a prognosis of a terminal illness?
I would, and I say that because I've seen many of my own loved ones who have suffered incredible pain and at their end of life, and I think that if somebody who is thinking rationally and with their own consent and decides they want to do that, certainly if I had a terminal illness and I knew there was a prognosis wasn't very good, I certainly would want to. I think that it's the right of the individual, and especially given today's healthcare and the way prognoses are far more accurate than they used to be, I think we should respect people's individual wishes in that regard.
And I know that I said that was going to be the last one. Just any general thoughts on the Me Too movement, the sexual, Kathleen Parker wrote a column in our paper saying that she applauds the women who have come forward and stuff,
Yeah.
but she thinks this has gone a little too far, that everybody who's being accused is automatically indicted
Yeah.
and stuff, and she thinks there's got to be a process here. She doesn't, but fairness. She says there's got to be fairness. What are your general thoughts on the
No disrespect to Kathleen Parker, but I think that we need to have a zero tolerance policy with these kind of things. I think for too long this is something that has been neglected, that women's rights in general, not just in the workplace, but has, with regard to equal pay or a woman's right to choose, has been deprioritized, and I think that's completely wrong. And it's exciting in my mind that we've reached a point in our society in which we're taking a stand and saying, first of all, it should have happened a long time ago, but we're taking a stand by saying that workplace harassment is not acceptable, and that we do need to have a zero tolerance policy for that.
Isn't there a difference between, say, Harvey Weinstein and Aziz Ansari? I mean, those are sort of along the spectrum,
but I think
really different things.
I think the principle is the same, which is we have historically lived in a male-dominated culture where men feel like they can do whatever they want to women and get away with it. That has historically been what has happened in this society. It's a male-dominated culture where you have a lot of men who think that they're above the law and can bully women and all of that. That's wrong, and I think we are finally achieving a point in which we are taking a stand that is wrong, and we need to have a zero tolerance policy for it.
I think the issue of zero tolerance, though, can be, it does sort of absolve you from critical thinking, in that, every situation can be a little different, and not everyone deserves a death penalty.
Well, I think men have lacked critical thinking for a very long time.
Okay, fair enough.
Right, and so as I said, Harvey Weinstein was an empowered male who had an inflated ego on himself and thought that he could treat women like dirt and get away with it, right? Someone like Aziz Ansari, I think, had a similar mindset of, I'm a rich and famous guy, and I don't know much about the story, I've read the article, I can do what I want to this person and get away with it. And I think the principle is the same. And I think that mindset of, I'm a man, therefore I can assert power over women, is a fundamental belief by those people that women are unequal to men, and that's wrong.
I've enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you.
I go on another hour.
Please.
Economy of your words and well-formed responses.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
So I'm going to ask you the final question, unless Chris has. You can ask after my question.
Sure, please.
Okay? Should Belichick have played Malcolm?
I was going to ask that.
Go on.
I went with the serious question.
I'm going to get things serious again for a second.
Let him answer the question.
Oh yeah, actually we do want.
Well, I'm a guy who likes to see the facts before I make a decision. We have asymmetric information right now. I've heard the stories.
Wow, that's a politician's answer, I have to tell you.
Unfortunately, we couldn't ask this question. The other kid.
Look, Bill Belichick has gotten us 5 Super Bowls, and Belichick I trust. I'll give him this one. Good question. When we were doing our practice for this was not one of the questions.
Think about the practice.
I just want to hear you talk a little bit about, you've outlined a lot of progressive positions, a lot of calls for federal support for different programs.
Yeah.
This would obviously require a reallocation of resources as it exists. Where do you think the government should draw from, either by raising taxes or defunding certain programs? What do you think the government should take from to put resources toward your suggestions?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So 2 things. One, I think this tax cut would have given a lot of resources towards a lot of these programs that weren't allocated in the best way. So first and foremost, not doing these kind of things. I believe that we should be investing, and I think that's really important. But secondly, and I go back to the data-driven stuff that I talked about, it's boring, I get it, I get data and technology is kind of boring in a vacuum, but it's game-changing if applied in the right way. In a very small example in Boston, we were able to save millions of dollars in how we administer better services for less money. And if you think about the City of Boston with a $3 billion budget and you apply a multiplier to the federal government, we could be saving billions of dollars just by looking at, hey, the money that we're putting out there, the hard-earned taxpayer money we're putting out there, are we getting the return that we should? And I think that kind of scrutiny doesn't really exist at the federal level, and we need to prioritize that, because I think you're going to find like you do in the private sector, and you guys know this, that what gets measured gets managed. And if you're good at measuring and you understand where you're putting the resources, you're going to be much better at serving people in an improved way.
Tom, you're all set? Everyone else, you all set, boss?
Yeah, it's very, very good. I could go on for,
Oh, hey, I got all the time in the world.
Well, Dan, I want to thank you for coming in.
Thank you very much.
The answers were succinct.
Thank you.
Which was welcome to us today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.